Hey everyone, it's Patrick from 8-Bit Doodads. Today's video is going to be my favorite things that have come from e-waste or from electronic recycling, if you will.
Say, kids, what time is it?
It's 8-Bit Doodads time!
I thought I'd start out actually telling you how my journey or experience into electronic recycling e-waste began. And that was several years ago when I first met my partner on this channel, Greg, whose business is electronic recycling for the multiple counties in our area. And he had posted on Facebook Marketplace some Macs, and at the time I was using, my main computer was Macintosh, although I had Windows machines and Windows servers as well. But I had one of those Mac all-in-ones. I think it was a first generation or second generation i5. But I had kept up with, what kind of Macintoshes are out there. And I had always wanted a Mac Pro, which is what you're seeing on the screen over there on the right. Greg, in his electronic recycling, he gets mostly PCs, and they get broken down and into their component parts so they can be reused, the chips, the RAM, power supplies, etc. But when it came to these particular Macs, they're a lot harder to tear down, but also they don't have because they don't have traditional motherboards, they don't have traditional power supplies. You can remove the RAM and the memory from them, the memory and the processor from them, but it's like 4 times as hard to do. And it also is destroying a machine that someone actually might like. So he had started collecting a particular set of machines. And as I said, he listed them on Facebook. And I saw the listing. And I immediately went down there. And what I ended up with was, that's less than half the stack that he had collected. And there was everything in there from a Mac Pro 1 to Mac Pro 3s. I've always been on the hunt for a Mac Pro 4 or 5, and more. We'll probably touch on that later in this segment. But the Mac Pro 3 was a dual Xeon system. You could upgrade the RAM. You could put faster graphics into it. It was actually a pretty great machine, and it ran circles around my first gen i5. Also within that stack, I brought one of them out, one of the, before the Mac Pro, this was a Macintosh system that ran their PowerPC processor. And there's all sorts of variation, and they come in different colors. And I think I have about 8 of those things around. But also in the Mac Pro line, which you can see there not only was Mac Pro 1s, 2s, 3s, which are different generations of their Xeon processor-based or Intel-based Macs when they had transitioned over to it. If you notice, these two machines right here look similar. They came in that what they call the cheese grater style Macintosh case, but these are PowerPC processors. So they're technically not they would be a Mac Pro Zero, if you will. But they were their high-end workstations at the time that ran Mac OS X. And almost all of these machines were used for video editing, sound editing, etc. But that's how I met Greg. That's how I got into recycling things and looking at what you can do with them. And yes, one of these machines is one I use daily. As well as some others that I got from him. I believe I ended up with a couple X servers, and I was running my home mail server. I run a mail server at home. I was running a web server on one. I was running a security recording all the IP cameras around the house on one. So we've gotten a lot of use out of, or reuse out of these older Macintoshes. And in fact, the latest one I have, I think, is from 2010, which puts it at 14 years old, but it's still a really great machine and is running the latest Macintosh operating system. Okay, what I thought I'd do is just quickly show you a couple of the machines that were in that stack that I think are some of the most valuable from a collector's standpoint. And I want to start with this one because I think this is the real unicorn, rare machine that came out of that pile. In fact, you can't find very many of these, partially because there probably weren't a whole lot sold, but there also is a maintenance issue, and I'm going to show you that in a second. This looks like a Mac Pro. As I mentioned earlier, the very first machines that used this cheese grater style case, were actually PowerPC based machines using what Apple called the G5 processor, the 5th generation. And I'm going to open this one up. And you can see it says G5. And it's typical with Apple, they over-engineer everything, so they have a nice little shroud in here to control airflow. And you'll see this thing has a big fan assembly. But again, like Apple, they make it really easy to just pull the fan right out. And I'm going to take the cover off on this one, actually, before I do, so I don't run into surprise. The entry level of these machines would come with a G5 processor, which could have 2 cores, and they ran in speeds, I think you get 2.3, 2.7 gigahertz, etc. They made one very high-end unit, which this is. And this is actually a dual processor. There are 2 chips down in there, you can see. But and both of those are 2 cores, so this would have been a 4-core machine, and it would have had, twice the performance of the others. But what's very unique about this, if you notice, is the radiators here and the tubing. This is water cooled. This was the only time that I know of that Apple got into water cooling the machines, and they did that for this high-end system because of the 2 chips and the higher speeds of the chips. There was more heat that was going to be generated. So they went to the water cooling method. When they moved on to the Xeon based machines, they got rid of water cooling and just went to larger heat sinks. And I'll actually show you one of those in a second. I said there's a maintenance issue. These are known to have leaks. This one isn't leaking, but I believe its reservoir is reduced because if I've had this machine running and it will work laying down like this, no problem. But if I turn it up, it will halt at some point. I think it's overheating because the cooling isn't working. Now, whether that's the motor, and I believe people have replaced the motors, they've replaced the liquids. There's a cap here for you to be able to change the fluid that's inside. So that's something I'll have to work on in the future. Just a note here, standard PCI slots. In the G5s, they only had space for 2 disk drives and space for 1 DVD drive. I just thought I'd quickly show you this since we were talking about Macs and end on the topic. This is a Mac Pro 5.1. This is the last one in this static case. And if you look here, you can see by the screws, this can hold the 2 DVD drives. Power supply got put back here, and here's where the hard drive bays are. PCI slots. The thing they did different, and I mentioned this in the second part of this video, is how these tear down is a little bit different. If you see, there's a motherboard down there, but the motherboard is actually quite dumb. It's just the interfaces for the drives and PCI slots. The actual power comes on a tray that removes, and this is what a dual Xeon tray looks like, where you have two processors, two sets of memory for each processor. And in fact, I did a video that you can check out on our channel about upgrading the processors, because the standard Apple config came with whatever was the cheapest Xeon at the time, but you can get faster ones. So you might want to check out that video. But this also came through Ewaste, and as you can tell, I don't know if you can tell, there's a SSD that's new and a hard drive in here. This is one of the machines that I use. Now for something a little bit different. 8-bit Doodads, a lot of our passion is about older vintage computers, Commodore 64, Apple IIs, Atari, and you might have seen at the start of this video, an IBM PC. It's not 8-bit, but clearly it's vintage. The original Macintosh is very vintage. So that's our passion and our hobby. There are times where things come into the Ewaste channel that actually is very beneficial to that hobby. And this is my little project box. I've used some of these things before, but everything in here is a zip drive. So you can see that use the standard zip disk, iOmega, that can be inserted and put back. Now these contain are 100 megabyte disks, which today sounds ridiculous, but back in the day of an 8-bit PC, 100 megabits was a lot. A 5 megabyte hard drive was something. This collection that I have here is, I have machines that have IDE interface, or machines, zip drives. There are SCSI zip drives in here, and even a USB drive. And the reason I've collected these is, especially with the SCSI drives, you can plug those into an old vintage computer that has a SCSI port. The Macintosh being one of them, but the reason I was collecting these was for the Apple II, because I have several SCSI cards, and if you use a zip drive as opposed to an actual SCSI hard drive, you can pop the zip drive out of the device and slide it into an IBM PC that has a zip drive, and you can use your Windows tools or your Windows emulator, or what have you, to run the same files or to transfer files back and forth. So if you're downloading new games or old games or software, this gives you a very convenient way of moving it between the different machines, since there are multiple utilities for dealing with zip drives formatted for, say, an Apple II or a Macintosh or a Amiga or etc. So that's why I have them, and I have collected some boxes of discs as well. And having the USB version allows me to plug it into any computer. But I do have a couple Macintoshes that have a zip drive built into it, and I have a couple Windows PCs that also have zip drives. But I've kept a hold when they've come through Ewaste. As you can see, 3 drives to be used if I want in building a new PC, or I want to build a for the SCSI one, I could put this into an external SCSI hard drive box and use it instead of a fixed disk drive. So this was a great find coming through Ewaste that helps support my vintage hobby. One of my other passions besides vintage machines, but actually this goes to my vintage passions too. I'm always about storage. That's why you'll find for all my vintage computers, Apple IIs, Commodores, what have you, I own devices that, like SCSI cards or network cards or hard drive emulators, floppy drive emulators. I'm always interested in different ways of storing the software and how to move things back and forth. But at home, I also have storage needs. I happen to have a large video collection, and one of my housemates is a photographer, and he's got tens of terabytes of photos. So, in fact, I'm going to show you later one of the e-waste items that came up, our next generation storage server, which is something that came through e-waste. But I also look at other kinds of storage devices. And this one came in, and I tell you, I was surprised. I didn't understand. I thought it was one thing, and it turned out to be another. I'll give you a clue. If we look at the back, you can see there's network port and some USB ports and power, and that's it. And as you might expect, this is a NAS device. Hey, don't worry, that won't hurt anything, and you'll see why in a second. I have others that again, all of these came through eWaste. Again, the same ports. This one has eSATA, can take a couple hard drives, and it gives you a 2-disc NAS device. I also have a couple of these that I'm fit to restore. They haven't been restored yet because I got to put the firmware on them. But as you can see, it takes 4 drives. And this is a Buffalo NAS device. Again, network ports, USB ports, what have you. But if you see, this thing weighs maybe 5-10 pounds. It's not too bad. When this came through eWaste, I'm picking it up. This thing's got to be weighing at least 20-25 pounds. And if you looked at the Buffalo that I just had next to it, I'll put them outside. They're similar in size. So I said, yay. Customer dropped this off. Obviously left the drives in it. And I talked to Greg, and Greg said the particular customer didn't need the drives destroyed. They just needed to go through our DoD erase protocol where it, wipes the drive 7 times, and then the drive can be reused. And I said, okay, I'll do the work of that. I got a 4 drive, and this is a Synology, so I said, that's a great box. I'd be happy to use it. Notice it has screws on it. The other one, the door just flapped open. So I'm going to get it out a bit. See if I can guess the right one on the first try. Too big. There we go. And I'm going to use the power screwdriver that Greg has done a review on in the blog. And take off the cover. I thought it was kind of strange that the cover unscrewed. Usually on NASs, like that Buffalo, you just open up a flap and the trays pull out. So I pull it out. And I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to move the light away a little bit. That's plastic. There's hardened plastic. And now I've got another screw and a heavy metal plate. So let's take this off. And if you look inside there, very heavy aluminum, and the drives go down inside there. And so I had to go look this thing up. And what it turns out is this NAS drive is waterproof and fireproof. That's what this plastic is for, is to give it the fire retardant, I'm sure. So you put your drives in there, and it has the aluminum plate to displace heat from the drives running. But then your drives are protected in the case your house floods or burns down. And that's why the unit is so heavy. As I said, I thought this was one of the more unique things I've ever seen come through eWaste. And yes, I'm actually planning on putting a couple large drives in this, and that will be another backup for my roommate's photo collection. Almost everything else, you can, software you download that we store on the servers or whatever can be replaced, but the photos never can be. So that's what the purpose of that device is going to be for. I thought that was something very unique. I mentioned earlier the way I originally met Greg was because he listed those Mac Pros for sale on Facebook, and then our friendship evolved. I started actually going down there, and I was helping him tear down machines, going on pickups, and actually it was fun for me because I'd see stuff coming in and out, and he would allow me to pick through certain things, and it was always a way to find like those zip drives that I could use for other things. He's also great in that when Apple stuff comes in, he thinks of me as the Apple guy for some reason. Yes, I do like Apple stuff. So he sets them aside. And every once in a while, there's some great stuff that comes in, keyboards, especially older mechanical Apple keyboards. I love mice, what have you. And in fact, some of that stuff is appropriate for some of these older vintage machines. So he's always putting that stuff away. These were two unique things that came in that I saved. This one I might actually use. This one I'll never use. But I showed to you. It's kind of a unique design, and for some reason there we go. You see this little pod? It's got the Apple logo on it. If we look on the back, it's got network jacks, power jacks, what have you. This is the original Airport Extreme Wi-Fi base that Apple sold. This was their first, and now they've gotten out of the Wi-Fi space now, but they've went through 7 or 8 generations of this. But this was the first one that came along, and I think this might be wireless A and B. It might have wireless G, but it certainly doesn't have any of the faster speeds today. But this would allow you to plug into the WAN. One of the things I note, it has a USB port, so you could plug a printer in here and share it by all the wireless devices. It had your port to your DSL or cable modem and one Ethernet port. It also has a phone port, and I believe on this series, you could plug this into a phone line, and it could back up the internet connection by dialing in. This is back in the days when dial was still very popular and DSL was the thing. Cable modems really hadn't come out yet, and the original DSL speeds were not as fast as they are today. So, being able to back up with a phone line wouldn't have been that painful as it would be today. One of the other things, and I've saved this one for a while, I have one of these myself already, which is an eyesight camera. This is the first camera that Apple came out with because PCs didn't have cameras built into them. Their notebooks didn't have cameras built into them yet. This was at the very start of people having webcams. The reason I kept it is it came in the box with all the accoutrements, and there's the camera. And in fact, the camera is in its little lipstick case, you might say. And it's aluminum, and it matches that. This came out at the time of those Mac Pros that were all aluminum, and they had started transitioning to aluminum. Firewire cables down in there. That's one of the reasons I wouldn't be using this today that much, is it uses firewire. So you have to have a Mac with firewire. And if we lift out all the literature, they also include, along with the cable, different stands. And the whole idea is if you want to put it on the ground, you'll see the little port in it. This links up so you can have this mounted like that. Or they gave you a little mount that mounts over your screen, and it can mount like that, just like standard video cam. But the best one was this part here, which they included, which plugs on. But this is metallic, or magnetic. So it'll stick to, and in fact, if you have an Apple monitor that's aluminum, well, it's not aluminum, it's steel, this will magnetize to it. So that was something I thought was really unique that I loved as just sort of a keepsake for that time frame, and it goes with those older Macs. Now, there are times when you get the holy grail of finds in the e-waste stream. And sometimes, those could mean different things to different people. Sometimes there'll be, oh, that's a great server. I can repurpose that in my house and store all my videos on it. But then there's the rare things that you come across. And as you see behind me is one of those rare things. Somebody actually dropped off an original IBM PC with monitor. Unfortunately, it did not have the original IBM PC keyboard. And in fact, it took us, I think, a year before we found a keyboard. It finally came in through eWaste to work with the machine. Part of it was because, and it dawned on me later, I was when to figure this out, is that's a PC, not an AT, and a lot of the newer keyboards that come with the little PS2 to the old 5-pin DIN 5 adapters, they'd only support the AT standard. So we had to get a keyboard that had the switch that did XT, AT, what have you. So it does work. This is actually one of our future projects. You'll be seeing some videos on this. There's two things in it that we'd like to update. One, it only has 384K of memory. I think there are some solutions out there that give you more memory. In fact, I think there's a card out there that gives you not only more memory, but will give you a hard drive emulator and some other things all in one card. So that's one way to go. Or buy an AST RAM pack or multifunction card that gives you parallel serial cards, whatever. The other thing is, you see the hard drive light is blinking. For some reason, the hard drive is disconnected from the controller, and I haven't plugged it in yet because the cable and the pins aren't lining up, and somebody bent a pin away. And I'm wondering whether they don't have the right controller or the pins or what have you. But I don't want to just plug it in there without testing things. It is an MFM drive, which is something I have a slight passion for because I have several other machines here that need MFM drives, and I have a couple of MFM emulators. So one way or another, I can look at getting the controller card in this machine to work and have a hard drive experience. There are some options. XT IDE is a card that gives you a CF card that emulates a hard drive. We could be doing one of those. I also have a GoTech, and while that's a full height floppy, there is a half height space above the hard drive. So I could put a GoTech emulator in there, and that would be a way to load software, but that's emulating floppies, not a hard drive. My other interest in this machine is I happen to have some network cards for another project dealing with Corvus Omni drives. I have Corvus transporters for the PC, and they're 8-bit ISA cards, and this could be one of those stations on that network. So that is something we want to play with. Not only have we seen this machine come in through eWaste, I have a compact 386, I think it is, that has a ESIA ports or card slots that also do ISA that we're going to restore. That's sort of unique and more vintage than, say a regular Pentium machine or whatever. So we're looking to do more with this. I'm so happy it came with a color monitor. Like to play Castle Wolfenstein on this, see what that looks like. I've mentioned eWaste several times. I have boxes, and I showed you the box of zip cards. I've also pulled cards from machines. I have to say, I know I pulled some game cards, and I want to look, and I have one IBM original DB19 game port. That would be interesting if I have an ISA version of one of those game cards. Put it in there, and we can run games on that on a future episode of In 8-Bit Doodads. I just wanted to show this real quick. This is something that came in through Ewaste. Actually, it came in through a friend of Greg's, who's also called Greg, who's in the e-waste business. In fact, he has a huge operation. I got to visit it one time, and that's when I was given this from him. He takes in recycling from folks, but he also does things like recycling mainframes and recycling the silver off of x-rays and all sorts of interesting things. It was one of the best experiences I had visiting another e-waste partner. This is a Tandy color computer. The reason I want to show it is it's unique to us because we don't have any other Tandys. I've now since gotten a Tandy Model 4P, so I have two Tandys. The reason I wanted to point this out to you all is actually as a call for help and looking for suggestions. What should I get to be able to use this computer and be able to do some things, run some software or what have you? I know it has cartridges. There's a cartridge for a floppy drive controller, and you can buy a floppy drive. But I'm so used to emulated floppy and hard drives, I'm wondering what might be available for this that allows me to play games on it or load software on it, that kind of thing. And so if any of you have any suggestions, I'd really appreciate them. Now, this one was a really special find. It actually came in on a load for recycling with a bunch of video recording equipment, and there was, I think, a video switcher in there, several video cameras, and several DVC tape decks, etc. And this was one of the, and there were a couple of these monitors. This would have been one of the control room or editing station monitors. Not very big. It is tube based, so obviously why they might recycle it. And you might wonder, why did I grab it? It's a color monitor, and I'll actually tilt this up so you can see the back. And it has composite inputs, input and output, SVHS that you would expect that might go to decks and what have you. But what I found is this monitor is perfect for plugging in an Apple II with just the composite input and having full color, and the resolution and frequency of this is so good that you can actually see 80 column text on this monitor. So you can have doing a full word processor, the original resolution of, say, an IBM PC monitor, but it can do color, black and white, what have you. Works with Commodore 64, and we can use it with several of our vintage machines, and it really gives a great picture. And in fact, I didn't show it, there's input and output on the back, but there's two different inputs. So you can plug this into two different systems, and with buttons here on the front, you can change which one you're viewing. It also has options for scaling the screen and what have you. So it's the right size for that kind of system. So I really love this find. In the e-waste stream, when you get lots of PCs, you get a lot of laptops, you get a lot of printers. And they're unfunctional printers, laser printers, inkjet printers, household printers, what have you. And a lot of that it does end up being shredded into the plastic and steel components, and the boards are ripped out and recycled. But occasionally you get a gem that comes through, and that's what you're seeing here on the screen. This is actually the second large format photo printer we've rescued out of the stream. We had one before this that was 6 years older than the model that's on the screen right now, and we used that for a year or two. We were able to rescue it, just put in new tanks, worked perfectly. Actually, that first one had a problem board. The main logic board was an issue. I was able to order a replacement. It cost a couple $100. but we got it up and running, and we used it for some time. One of my roommates is a photographer, and in fact, he has some 10, 20 terabytes worth of photographs at this point. And he's a photographer from both the digital age, and he develops his own film, etc. So his ability to print off large prints at home is nice. This printer we rescued, I guess, about a year ago. It came in. It's working fine, and in fact, I think those are the cartridges that came in with it. We haven't had to replace them yet. He's done some test prints where he's printed on here and then gone to Sam's Club and I think one other and printed the same photo, and we've done comparisons, and this printer prints better prints. This is actually one of the high-end printers of that generation. You can't see it. If you look at the top, you'll see there's a roller there. Below that is another roller. This can actually hold two different kinds of paper at the same time and will automatically switch between those. You can manually feed it. It works from Windows and the Mac. I've used it to print out several posters that are hanging in my office. In my particular case, I printed out some classic Apple posters. We've also printed out some 8-bit Doodads banners, so we've used this for our vintage work. And this was really a good find and with a lot of value. Now, if we're talking about e-waste, you get a lot through that channel, through electronic recycling, and I've put an emphasis on things that might help us in the vintage world. But there are other things that come through that can be rescued and repurposed for use today in our homes or what have you. And in fact, because there's a photographer in our house and we have terabytes of data, and I have a huge movie and television show collection that I've taken off of DVDs I've purchased, and actually I have a huge Laserdisc collection that I've converted into files that can be stored. I like a good file server, and so we'll pick up servers like this that are pretty recent, but it's still 5 or 6 years old. And this is the typical thing I could count on Greg for. When this thing came in, it had one processor, and believe it or not, it had 2 4-gig memory sticks in it. It was really low end, but the reason I liked it is it has 18 bays for hard drives. This is a typical good find that can be repurposed that comes in through the e-waste channel. It is somewhat of a server. Now, typically for me, I'll take something like this, and I already have on this machine. I went from the one processor to 2, and the one processor with 4 cores, I replaced it with 2 with 20 cores, and was able to move the memory from 8 gigs to, I think in this one now has 192 gigs. That's something that you hope to rescue, something like this that doesn't just get shredded or thrown out, and it can be reused, and this is going to be the next file server in our house. But other times in the same class of machine, you get something interesting. This would be that something interesting. This is a Sun Microsystems, which sort of don't exist anymore. Oracle bought Sun, but they stopped making machines. This would have been what was called a workstation class machine, probably used as a CAD station or possibly a video editing station. And it ran Solaris. It could also run Linux. There might have been 1 or 2 other operating systems that were available for it. Coming through the e-waste channel, this particular type of machine is not recyclable in the normal way. The big reason is the chips on it aren't ones that would get repurposed again. That could be, the chips pulled and put into a new system because they were Spark chips, and the popularity in that would be Intel chips. The memory could be pulled and reused, but the motherboard would just be scrapped. So tearing this thing apart for its components doesn't actually give you a lot of value. And in fact, because of the way that the system's designed, and you'll see it's pretty high-end, they even have plastic shrouds. There's motherboard down there. You can pull the processor off that. You could cycle the motherboard, but you get $2 a pound for that motherboard. So you get $1 or $2 for that. So there isn't a whole lot of, quote, value in tearing this thing apart, but there's intrinsic value as a, quote, vintage system that someone might use. And so Greg actually gave this to me because he knows I'm a fan of Unix and Linux, and I'd like to restore this to run Solaris again, to see what that's like, and have it as a unique experience. I've actually tried to restore this already once. The DVD drive, CD drive in it wasn't functioning. It won't boot off the CD drive. I've tried replacing it twice, and I still got nowhere. The next step, I understand, is you can make this machine boot off the network. I need to set up a TFTP server to do that, and that might allow me to reinstall Solaris over the network and get this machine up and running. And I thought it would be a great experiment, and it saves something from just being crushed and shredded into the metal and plastic components. Okay, this is the last item up for bid. Now, this is the last item I have to show you today, and it really defines uniqueness. I think I started the video talking about the IBM PC and how that was a great find and very vintage. This actually predates this. This is a Motorola development system for their 68XX line of processors, and one of the primary processors was the 6809, which is used in the Tandy color computer. This is the system that Tandy would have bought in order to write the original programming for the color computer for building the ROMs, or if they were building operating systems and other things. This is a system that Motorola would have sold to anyone who was interested in using their processors to build computers. You needed some way to do the initial programming for those computers. Intel has similar development systems. They had one for the 8080, the 8086, the 8088. Those last two used in the PC. They also had Intel development systems when they came out with the 286 and future processors, because the manufacturers of machines needed some way to develop, like I said, both the operating system and the either firmware or ROMs, as you might call them. This particular one I know did the 6809. I think there was also, it might have been a 6801 or a 6810. There were other chips in the series, and if you see from above, there's card slots in here. You could actually drop cards in that gave you those other processors. This machine had 2 floppies to save your work, and I think there might have been a board that you could drop in there to actually burn ROMs from what you saved on the drives. The machine is working, and if I turn it on, you can see the screen and everything. But for some reason, it can't boot from a floppy yet. I'm hoping that it's either just a dirty heads. I just recently bought a cleaning kit, so I'm going to give that a try. If not, I'm going to try to swap the 2 floppies to see if it's one of the floppy drives, and ultimately may put a GoTech in here to emulate a floppy drive to be able to use the system and see how it works. It can be both a development system running multiple languages. It also has the capability of being a terminal. It has an RS-232 port out the back. So this may be something you'll see in a future video of getting it working and how to use it the way it was intended back in the day. If you like this video on Ewaste, please give us a thumbs up. If you want to see more in our channel, please subscribe. We would appreciate that. If you have any comments on any of the systems that I showed, some of the recovery, We'd love to hear from you, and we're really good about providing feedback as well to any comments you have.